Good afternoon, Racket Athlete fans. This is Chris Nichol with the Racket Athlete podcast again today. We have on for the second time Rachel, who is the owner and founder of Biomechanics Education. Today we're going to talk about how stretching affects sports performance. So welcome to the show again, Rachel.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me back.
It's great to have you back again.
Yeah, no, I'm interested. I mean, when you sent me through the question, my head started spinning into, okay, this is just a podcast. We've got to bring it down into meaningful information that listeners can actually take and utilize and research further as well. So,
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So let's have a little chat again, just a bit about like the last time you were on here was probably last year. So let's have a bit of an update on what you've been doing and where you're at just now before we start.
yeah, well, the education is flying. We've now gone international. We've got a master trainer running our courses in Singapore. He's over in Korea, Canada, America, New Zealand,
Nice.
Jakarta, Turkey, loads of places.
Yeah,
But ultimately, it's about getting the message out there, and it's clearly happening. The sort of passion for risk reduction, optimizing performance in this kind of environment that we're talking about here, it actually fits into every environment. So
yeah,
occupational health, supporting the NHS, those who are less able, going to the GP practices. So it's kept us really busy. So I've been in front of Amazon Europe last week, which was interesting, which made me think of the occupational health side. But certainly in elite sport, which is it's where my passion is, working with athletes, not necessarily racket sports specifically, but certainly at that high level, playing sport and being ready for it, and then having longevity in that sport as well. So,
yeah,
so there's a lot going on, Chris.
yeah. So it sounds like you've been very busy then, and there's lots happening for you. So um, let's focus now on the stretching performance and sports performance. So let's have a look at this. First thing I'm going to ask you to start the conversation is what is stretching to you, Rachel? What is it you see it as for you?
Yeah, in simple terms, you're lengthening a muscle. We could put it very simply, but stretching works by temporarily lengthening muscles and connective tissues to improve flexibility, range of motion, and muscular control. And I don't know how scientific we want to get, but when the muscles stretch, there's a muscle spindle, and the spindle records the change in length and how fast we do
And
that, which is where through this conversation, yeah, we're going to talk about different types of stretching.
yeah,
And the spindles then record the change in length and the speed and send a message to the spine. And this triggers a stretch reflex. And the reflex is that the muscle resists, or that the spindle resists the change in muscle length, which causes the stretched muscle to contract. So a stretch actually gives you a contraction response, which
yeah,
is quite
yeah,
an interesting thought.
yeah,
And this is what the concept of plyometrics is based on, is that the more sudden the muscle changes length, the stronger the contraction. And really it's about those muscle spindles controlling and maintaining muscle tone. And this is about protection, which is
yeah,
obviously where a lot of people understand stretching to fit in. But there are reasons for holding prolonged stretches, because then the muscle spindle reduces that signal. And so that can gradually train the stretch receptors to allow the muscles to lengthen. So I don't want to do I get technical? I don't know.
I
Maybe,
mean,
maybe that's
it's a
technical
great
enough.
conversation to have actually because it's something that's stretching is spoken about a lot in simple terms, but maybe not enough
Yeah.
technical terms, but simple technical terms as well, so people can understand it, right?
Yeah, oh, totally. And in simple terms, you're just lengthening the muscle.
Yeah,
But we know there are different types of stretching, like
yeah,
static stretching, dynamic, ballistic. You've
DNF.
even got things like PNF, so
Yeah,
proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And we can give examples of those. But when it comes to sport and racket sport in particular, which is where my mindset was when you asked me these questions, it's understanding what happens to those muscles in that sport when we extend the shoulder or the arm with a bracket in it, and then we want to power it forwards very fast at a certain angle, for example. So we can relate the stretching very bespokely to the sport or the activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of programming.
Yeah. So I think that's a great point you brought up there about being specific to the sport as well. Something that probably needs to be spoken about a lot more as well in the sports performance arena is not just stretching, but stretching for the sport, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the more bespoke the program, and obviously there are generic aspects to it, you know, stronger glutes, stronger quadriceps, again,
Lower
depending on the
back and
sport.
all that. Yeah, totally.
Right, to be mobile. So if you play a bracket sport, you will need thoracic spine, rotation, mobility, but you also want velocity around the spine because you want to, rotate at speed with the arm extended to some degree, maybe the elbows flexed, and to hit the ball, do an ace in tennis or whatever the sport is. So there's a lot biomechanically that's happening, and understanding that how muscles function and respond to stretch. Because when you extend the arm ready to hit a ball in a racket sport,
Rotator
you are
cuff as well.
stretching. So that's a dynamic stretch, probably at speed. So, you know, and then obviously the opposite action to contract the muscles and hit the ball.
Yeah.
So it's all involved in the sport, but preparing for that, yeah, you can make it very bespoke.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next area then. So where do you see people or athletes missing the benefits of stretching in this day and age?
I think there is a lot of emphasis on being strong and playing the sport as a practice for the sport, and that absolutely makes sense. The strength and conditioning side is obviously really important, but the ability to move is the foundation of any sport, any movement goal. We need to build the body from the ground up, so to speak. So without that preparation piece, which stretching is one part of, then the ability to move fast, efficiently, with a reduced risk could be more limited. There may be an increased risk. And this relates back to, if you imagine any racket athlete, they will probably have, and again, I'm being generalistic now, amateur racket athletes probably have a day job. They're going to maybe sit at a desk, unless you're pro. And if you're pro, you will still have a lifestyle habit.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing to consider is the asymmetry aspect of racket sport. And so Federer's arm is one example, isn't it? It's quite famous, isn't it, in tennis? Federer's racket arm is much bigger than his non-racket arm.
Yeah.
And so biomechanically, that's advantageous maybe to the sport, the development from the sport, but in daily life, that's increasing risk.
Yeah.
Because the asymmetries you then live with create compensation
imbalances
through the body. So I think understanding basic biomechanics, healthy biomechanics in your sport, in your daily life, and then how that translates into your sport, but vice versa. So where do people or athletes miss the benefits of stretching? I think I need to just add in here, if I may. Stretching, as I've defined it, is we think of that, and the example I was stretching a muscle. However, muscles are, and this is probably the most underrated exercise, by the way, muscles are inhibited by nerve tension. And so for those listening who are not familiar with the notion of nerve mobilization, to improve the range of motion in a nerve will allow you to stretch a muscle more effectively, because the muscle may be inhibited trying to protect the nervous system that's tight somewhere else. So unless we mobilize the nerve and or then help the muscle change length, there are adaptations and compensation.
Yeah, that's a great answer, by the way. It's so like mixed between simplifying it, but also giving the technical answer as well, which is great. That'll be very helpful for the listeners. So I think moving on to the next thing, you've answered that pretty well, to be honest. What advice can you give to listeners about stretching for sports performance? I know you've kind of given some there, but
Yeah, I can talk about generally our life, even a big commentary whilst you weren't here.
yeah, 2 seconds.
And he's back.
Yeah, so what's happened
So
is
you
for some reason it's just cut off.
right.
Okay. So
You can
yeah,
probably edit from
yeah,
your last
I'll edit
question. You
that.
could
Yeah,
probably
I can edit
edit.
that.
If we pause now and then I'll answer the question. So the advice that I would give about stretching for sports performance is to consider the whole picture. So we can get very focused on the sport, and we've acknowledged earlier that the modalities of preparation and strengthening for a sport need to look like that. However, our bodies need to function in a certain way for daily life. So it's considering what we do with our body through the day. And this is an interesting thing. I can't remember who it was who said this, but I love this quote and I keep saying it. Our bodies are adapting 100% of the time.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Just think about that for a moment. And you imagine playing a racket sport and then you sit at a desk for 8 hours a day
Yeah,
and then you don't stretch or you do a bit of stretching.
yeah,
We need to consider, is that enough? The body is a master of compensation. So are there opportunities through our daily life, maybe at a desk or whatever else we're doing, to lengthen muscles, move our body through fuller ranges of motion? And I'm being sort of literal here. Squat in a cupboard rather than bend over. Do a
yeah,
squat every time.
yeah,
Half raised, reaching into a high cupboard. So there's that side of it. So there's the
yeah.
daily lifestyle, move a little bit more and more often.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of sport specificity, obviously there should be consistency in preparation for movement, and that involves stretching as we've described it, mobilization for nerves, joint mobilization, so all of this preparation and stretching around each of the joints within the body. But then also strengthening both sides of a joint to ensure that we have the appropriate joint strength ratio. And this comes into play when we think about specific sports and stretching. One issue, I think, is people will only stretch the bits that feel tight.
Yeah, not overall body stretch.
Yeah, we need to focus on the body as a system, so the chains throughout the body. So we can have maybe some focus. Calves is usually a given for most people.
Yeah,
Stretch the calves probably,
and the quads.
maybe the quads,
Yeah,
quads and hip flexors. But that doesn't mean your hamstrings, your hip extensors are not going to enjoy some length. It's like I always think of it. There's a lady called Katie Bowman who's a biomechanist, and she talks about movement as nourishment for the body, and finding movement nuggets that really feed every joint and structure in your body. When can we lengthen, stretch, and move, combined with very specific dynamic stretching prior to sport for a certain amount of time, post sport and in recovery, maybe more static relaxation stretching with some breath work that allows the nervous system to calm down after a game. So it takes, you've got these whole different levels of a simple word of stretching, and it actually plays in lots of different ways. So you might also look at the sport and think about, as we've said, the recoil of hitting a racket to the ball, but also that velocity within the spine. So could the stretching and the mobility work include those movements? I think I answered the question. Was that right? Anything more?
yeah. No, I think that kind of covers it. You've kind of like spoken about daily movement, sport specific, for the listeners that are either playing it as a hobby or they're playing in competitions or they're playing pro. So yeah, I think that's a great answer. Um, Specifically with racket sports and injuries, do you think stretching can help with impact around the core? Well, I've kind of answered this anyway. So, but go a little bit more into it about, I think, for example, injuries I noticed, because I'm a squash player myself, ankle joints, shoulder joints, knees are examples of things that can go when you're playing squash because it's such a high intensity sport. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I might be a bit controversial here. I'm not sure, but you're right. Rotator cuff injuries, repetitive strains, like your tennis elbow, golfer's elbow,
Yeah,
hamstring, groin strains, as you mentioned, ankle sprains, Chris, and they're so gnarly, aren't they? Those ankle sprains, they hang
yeah,
around for so long. So, in terms of thinking, when we're thinking about stretching and strength work, when we want to reduce the risk of these types of injuries, when you look at how you move in a sport, it certainly isn't in that purely that bench press or shoulder press position.
no,
So, how can we stretch and strengthen and mobilize the shoulder joints outside of basic foundational pushing,
yeah,
pressing, pulling moves?
yeah,
Is there a methodology for using cables and attachments to lengthen
yeah,
and then maybe use some of that reflex to get the neuromuscular response to the speed from a tennis racket? And this is again where the nervous system plays in, because a muscle will often tear because the nerve has been overstretched and the
yeah.
body would rather damage a muscle than a nerve.
The
So
nervous system didn't
again,
catch up quick enough.
underestimate that system within the chain.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds. I mean, yeah, it should be like for stretching, for example. You don't need to just use the body, right? You can use different. Yeah, there's tools for stretching nowadays, things you can use as well, right?
Absolutely, and this is
Can you hear me?
patience, and knowing what feels right, but also to have your beliefs changed and challenged and staying up to date. I think is
It's a key thing, definitely, 100%. Staying up to date, keeping on top of it, knowing what's useful for a sport and what's not useful for a sport, because not everything is useful for one sport. As we're talking about specificity here, yeah, I would say so. Like there's different mechanisms. What about foam rollers? Do you believe in foam rollers? Do you use them at all? Or?
yeah. I've got one there behind me. So look, this is again where there's controversy around that's rubbish, this is great. Somebody else will say, well, this is rubbish and this is great. Everything will work for someone,
Yeah,
but nothing works for everyone.
no,
So
no,
I'm a fan of, okay, maybe I mean, I have vibration tools, I have foam rollers, I have lacrosse balls. Um, I am a manual therapist. I go and have manual therapy regularly.
yeah,
I think knowing what works for you, my
yeah,
husband, that's just not his thing. He's not going to respond to massage.
yeah,
I respond well because I enjoy massage. So it's knowing the individual, the player, or yourself. If you like foam rolling, then you're going to respond to that
yeah,
with some degree of physiology. You are you're rolling the tissue. It's probably more compressive than a manual therapist's hand, so it doesn't replace manual therapy hands. But who
yeah,
can afford manual therapy every day? That'd be amazing, wouldn't it? So where you may have tender spots post race, for example, or because I've been running, training my half marathon, my calves. So rolling them out, I feel better. You could, and this was another thing just I wanted to highlight as well, Chris, is using benchmarks. So measurement benchmarks, and you can do this really easily on your. So my fascination is in measuring human bodies, and if you can't afford or don't have the ability to go and see somebody who can do that, it's really easy. So something like sitting on the floor, reaching out towards the toes, how far can you get? That's a measurement. Seeing your range of motion
yeah.
when you rotate, keeping the hips still, that's a
Hmm.
benchmark. So you could do a test like that, use a technique and intervention like foam rolling or massage guns, and then redo the test. And if you improve your range, then that's probably a good one for you. So I'm a kind of, I'm open to every person that likes it. It's going to help, surely.
Yeah, I would actually say, yeah, I mean, there's not everything's for everyone, as you say. I agree with that. Um, especially with different body types as well, and different statures and limb length and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about what's available to the individual. If you can't afford a massage, what else can? I literally taught self-manual therapy. This was actually a lockdown on wine bottles.
Yeah.
So you can be creative with it. If you can't afford a
Yeah.
foam rod, they're relatively cheap these days. But you've got a dog. They usually have a ball. You can roll
Yeah.
that in the glute. So
Yeah. So let's move on to another topic of if you can advise the viewers where to start with stretching for sports performance, what would you tell them? What would be the first thing you would tell them?
to a racket sport athlete, where
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. For sports
so
performance, yeah.
start with some measurements. Whether you're measuring yourself, it's understanding your start point. So where am I at the beginning? And this is about smart goaling. It's being really specific. So where are you right now? Where do you want to be? So you have measurements. It might be speed running around the court. It might be how high up the ranking in a competition you are. It might be range of motion in a joint. So find some benchmarks and some measurements. And then if I was your coach, I'd say, well, where do you want to get to? What's the difference between where you are now and where you want to be in either your level in your sport, the speed you run, or the range of motion in your ankle joint? And then we take that and we're like, right, okay, the difference is this much. So what can we introduce first? And there's a theory, it's called Occam's razor, OCCAM. Might be a Mr. Occam, I'm not sure. Occam's razor. I think this is in clinical practice. But
Ah,
I think the theory works really well in
yeah.
elite sport.
Okay.
You begin with the simplest solution first. So rather than doing lots of things at the beginning, like loads of stretching, loads of strength, we won't know what's changed what's had the effect. So begin simply with a plan of, I want to increase my dorsiflexion to some degree to have more power through the foot. That inadvertently may make you faster on the court anyway. And then you can add strength training on top. And so you have this constant benchmarking and adding in stretching, strength work. But absolutely, movement quality is number one in any sport or any movement strategy.
Yeah.
You have to move well first. So where are you limited? What are the measurements and benchmarks of external rotation, maybe internal rotation in the humerus, maybe your nerve mobilization, the median nerve in the arm can be a big limiter in racket sports. Does that elevate the shoulder and make your upper trapezius go into spasm? So all of these benchmarks and thoracic rotation, of course,
Yeah.
could then contribute to speed, power,
Agility.
neuromuscular control, balancing. You spend most of your time on one foot in racket sport because you're
Yeah.
running around the sport, change of direction, cutting,
Yeah.
and ultimately not getting injured. So start simply, think of Occam's razor, just start really basic. How well do I move? What do I want to achieve? Where am I starting my benchmark? And then you can start that process of building your body ready to be robust on the racket sport court or pitch or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your field is
Tennis
you play
court,
on.
squash court, table tennis court, badminton court. There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. So obviously, just to clarify, keep it simple. What was that? What was the gentleman called again? Ocken Razor?
Occam's razor,
Occam's.
OCCAM. So Occam's razor. Maybe it was a Dr. Occam, Mr. Occam, Professor Occam, maybe. I've not had a look actually who he is, but I
Yeah.
believe it's a clinical practice sort
Oh,
of
nice.
concept.
I'm actually
And
going
you
to
can
look that up as well.
recognize
Have
it.
a look at that.
Yeah. Recognize it if you think of how GPs practice. They tell you
Yeah.
to move more. Keep going back, they'll give you meds. If you keep going back, they send you to physio, and the
Uh,
interventions get more extreme until they offer you surgery. So
yeah.
start. You don't
Start
want that
simple.
end.
Yeah, that's it. Right. So, final couple of things then, Rachel. Where can people contact you if they want to speak to you, particularly about anything about you've spoken about today?
Yeah, if you, I've got a website, biomechanics education, so www.biomechanics.education.com. If you're interested in being trained in biomechanics coaching to help athletes on the course, if you are more of a social media nerd or you just want to find out a little bit more, then if you go to Instagram, I'm on at biomechanics_education. I do a lot of videos and blogs on there. So go and have a read in there. And then finally, if you like to consume video, we've got a YouTube channel called Biomechanics Education.
Nice. And do you have any final words for the Racket Athlete listeners about anything we've spoken about today or anything in particular?
Well, I'm on a mission, Chris, to empower, improve movement through education. I'm always happy to talk to people like yourself. I really feel humbled and honoured to be invited onto podcasts. If anybody wants to get in touch, Rachel at biomechanicseducation.com. You can contact me directly.
Great, thank you. So it's been great to have you back on again today, Rachel, talking about stretching for sports performance. And this is the Racket Athlete podcast with Chris Nichol, with Rachel Thompson today, and we'll speak to you soon.